My guest today is Tanya Geisler. She is a specialist in managing and meeting our inner imposter with compassion. I came across her work through Susan McCulley, who many of you will already know from other episodes of the podcast. And I was talking to Susan about imposter syndrome and how useful I think it is to explore it, to understand it from different angles, to really work out what it is that imposter is actually trying to bring to us. Like, how does it benefit us? How does it serve us to have this sense of imposterness? Because there's always something behind something that we're feeling. There's always something that part of us is trying to bring to our benefit, even though it might feel as though it's to our detriment. So to get inside that a little bit and understand that, and also to understand, like, so what can we do when we have a strong sense of being an imposter, what we call, imposter syndrome? Then how do we move on from that? How do we manage that? What can we put in place that's going to really support us with moving on from it? And I know that I've felt like an imposter at times. I think it's quite rare for someone not to have felt like an imposter at certain times of our life. And for some of us, of course, that feeling can be very, very present for a lot of our life. So I'm really excited to talk with Tanya and to learn from her wisdom and hear all of the advice and guidance and stories that she can share with us. Now, Tanya's background is a little bit similar to mine, actually. So she came to coaching after years and years in an outwardly successful, but as she says, ultimately unsatisfying career in advertising. And one of the things she talks about is how she suffered a lot from a myriad of not good enough, not smart enough, not ready beliefs. And I think this is a really interesting one as well. This is something I see often with clients, in that any success she chalked up was due to someone else having made a mistake. And she thought it was just a matter of time before they found out that she was a fake. And then it took the passing of her mother to get her unstuck. And this can be such a common experience, actually, that it's through grief, the depth of grief, that we finally start listening to things that have been either coming up from our inner self, or things that perhaps that person who passed away had been saying to us. And in Tanya's case, that's what happened. After her mother died, she heard, and she says she really heard, her mother's lifelong mantra for the first time. And her mantra was, "Don't postpone joy." I love that was her mother's mantra. And I love that Tanya finally was able to really hear it. I'm also very mindful of the fact that it took grief for her to get to that place. So I say that with a lot of compassion, of course, for her. And today we're going to be talking about imposter syndrome, how it hinders us, how it can serve us, or rather what that part is trying to achieve for us, and how we can turn toward it with greater compassion. And there's a phrase that Tanya uses on her website, and I'll share all the details for how to contact her if this is work that you'd like to explore more. And she says, "It's time to answer your calling, your unique and exquisite and divine reason for being on the planet. the one you are singularly designed to manifest, bring forth, and share. And I think that sentence probably gives us a little bit of an idea of Tanya's outlook on the world. And I'm really looking forward to her joining me shortly. Wonderful. Tanya, so gorgeous to see you. So gorgeous to have you on the show. And as we just shared, for everyone watching us on YouTube, we both got the memo about wearing green, which is it's always good to know that we're listening. And yeah, I'm just so excited. I've looked at the work that you do and I follow you on Instagram now, and I can see that there is such a beautiful correlation between the approach that you take to supporting people with imposter with the work that I do around self-compassion. And so, yeah, this introduction from Susan McCulley feels really, really good.
Perfect.
So
Happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me, truly. And for all of your grace and the rescheduling, and we made it happen. Here we are. How wonderful.
yeah, well, here we are. Flow. That's what it is.
That's it. That's it.
So I've given everyone a little bit of an introduction to you, a little bit about your background. But I'd love to get a sense, just in a few sentences, just what it is that brought you into this work around imposter. And then maybe we can sort of dig into that a little bit later
Yeah.
as well. But
Well, I mean, I'm never entirely sure. There's so many different doors that I can enter into to share how I ended up in this work. And I think really it's just the moment it was named for me, that this was the experience that had been ribboning through my entire life. It didn't matter what awards I had won. It didn't matter what accolades I had received. It didn't matter the promotions or whatever it was. It didn't ever feel like that I had earned it. Or I didn't really feel like I could own it. And so when somebody said, you are experiencing, it really showed up for me in my business. When I first started my business, it literally chased me, or was this just sort of like always hiding in the shadows, but really showed up in my business. And I got really curious as to why it was showing up so specifically in my business. And now I have now I understand why. At the time I didn't. So when I found myself in coaching, in leadership coaching, I noticed it didn't matter, again, how successful my clients were. They'd sat on Oprah's couch. If they had their book on the New York Times best-selling list, they had this experience that I still didn't have a name for. So when it was named for me and I understood it through the lens of my client's experience, it was like, oh, it just felt like sweet relief and opportunity, and an opening and an expansion. And so that was I guess that would have been, in about 2004. 2000, yeah. And then, no, probably named 2007. Sorry, pardon me. And then it took me a little bit of time so I was trying to understand it. And then I was invited to do a TEDx talk. And I tell you, there is nothing more focusing than being asked to put everything you believe and uphold into 18 to 20 scant minutes. And the theme was, what is the difference, or the space between what we believe and what is real? Well, for me, that was just the like, oh, let's really dig in and get very specific. And through that invitation, really all of the rest of my work kind of unfolded.
beautiful. When I worked in a corporate world and I ran big teams, which I think is a bit of our shared history, I used to say, and people who listen to the podcast regularly will have heard me say this before. I used to say to my team, if you want something doing, start a fight. Now, it was a very interesting expression to use, and I've since explored like why I would have used that kind of language. But the principle underneath it was sometimes you've just got to be like pushed into the edge
Yeah.
in order to be able to really make something happen. And it sounds like that TEDx talk really kind of took you to the edge
Yeah.
and made you go, okay, so
Mhm.
now I have to understand what it is that I'm doing and how I do it. That's really
Absolutely.
beautiful.
It's so interesting that you said it exactly that way too. I love, because I know I have an understanding of you and how you move in the world too. So much of what I assigned to my own failing was actually when I think about back in advertising, when that was my last corporate, gig, I guess. Um, there was a way in which sorry, I really have to drill into that a little bit. I've been in my head because I think about the way that we inspire others is to give a little bit of tension, but when does that tension subvert into sort of coercive power? And I
Mm.
think that that is a question that I sit with that an awful lot. Part of my framework is rooting into your power and why we're so fearful of that power. Usually it's because we have had experiences where that power has been so coercive or oppressive.
Mm.
And I divested when I started my own business and when I moved into this realm. I divested from that sense of, if you're not suffering, you're not doing it right.
Mm.
If you're not constantly up against the wall, constantly at that edge, then you're doing something wrong. Right?
That
So
resonates
yeah, right. Yeah.
so deeply, so deeply.
Mm.
I think it's there's something about this thing that where we often hear about, swimming upstream or
Mm.
swimming downstream, and we're taught through so many of the stories that we gather that if you're not swimming upstream, if you're not struggling, if you're not really effortful,
Mhm.
then it's not worth the outcome, or
Mhm.
you're not putting the work in.
Mhm.
And so we kind of learn that actually when things feel like flow, when things feel at ease, that in some way that's lazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's really interesting. So I'm curious about, I have a sense there is a thread, a deeply connecting thread here to imposter syndrome and how that feels. So I'd love for you just to explain a bit about what you see in how it manifests for the people that you work with. What does it feel like?
Well, I can never enter into this conversation without acknowledging the foremothers of the concept, because I do think it's so deeply important to attribute the teachers. So Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes were the clinical psychologists who named this experience as imposter phenomenon back in
Okay.
1978.
Okay.
So they were working with high functioning, high achieving women at Oberlin College and saw this same through line that I noticed for myself, which is it didn't matter how successful these women were, they would attribute all of their success to luck, fluke, timing, having somehow managed to convince people they were smarter or more capable than they actually were. Their failures, on the other hand, they were more than able to internalize. Anything that went wrong was absolutely on them, but they didn't extend themselves that same perspective when it had anything to do with their successes. That was all external. So that really is the hallmark of this experience, that it doesn't matter how much success you have, it's that not being able to own it, not being able to claim it, not having deserved it. They're just being nice. It's just a matter of time. I'm not ready yet, right? All of that. And that feels deeply true and deeply visceral.
Mm.
Um, Sidebar here, if you're all noticing, I do have a bit of, I still have a well, I'm still recovering. I'm recovering from a COVID experience. So that's why I'm a little more nasal than usual. I'm just hearing it in my voice and it's distracting me a little bit. So that's the kind of the hallmark of it. And what I have extrapolated with, again, I know that this conversation is not linear. They're going to be looping back and looping back. What I became fascinated by was its three objectives, in that it's going to always try to keep you out of action. It's going to try to have you doubt your capacity, and it's going to want to keep you alone and isolated. So that's the hallmark, is that it really, you don't identify with the successes, you over identify with the failures. And it has those three main objectives. But the sort of tilde here is that there are other things in our experience that will create those same conditions. So I don't think that we can talk about this as a very flat experience, right?
Beautiful.
Because if you have trauma, if you have experienced transphobia, if you've experienced fat phobia, if you've experienced these other intersections, the experience will become exacerbated. And I just think it's really important to recognize that. So I only ever talk about the imposter complex as a structure. I also like to acknowledge the lens of my experience as a white, neurotypical, able-bodied woman of middle-class means living in North America. So if that's not your experience as you're listening to this or watching this, please know I recognize that we may be, like my friend Stacey Jordan Shelton says, we may be having a shared, we may be in a shared space, but we might not be having the same shared experience. So
Yeah.
I'd like to acknowledge there are lots of distinctions within this.
Yeah.
And even the concept was 1978. So it's a very North American focus of the studies. For instance, it's English focused. They were working only with women. So there's a lot more to it, but I think it's really important to just acknowledge where it came from. Sorry.
Really, really wonderful. And I think that reflection, thank you for that, that reflection of the difference of experience, that while we might be talking about the same kind of pool of emotions, and I like the fact that you call it imposter complex as well, because it is complex. That that our entry point to that pool could be from a very different direction, with a very different set of life experiences
Yeah,
behind us.
absolutely. Absolutely.
And it's interesting you mentioned about luck, because one of the things that I was reflecting on is that sort of through my career, and also through times in my married life as well, where my husband and I have kind of, I remember when we first bought a couch, it's quite a few years ago, we first bought a couch, and we kind of kept like sitting on the couch and just going, God, is someone going to come and take the couch away? Because it didn't feel like it could possibly belong to us. And it was, we were very young, and it was a big investment, this couch. I think that what it shows to me is how the kind of traces of it can show up in seemingly quite insignificant ways, but actually the kind of core feeling of, this doesn't belong to me, or I don't deserve this, can really sit with a much deeper story inside
Absolutely. 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 And again, there's so many different ways to go into this, and that's why the book is coming. But there are, we are dealing with our upper limit challenges, our ancestors' upper limit challenges, right? Like, who gets to have a couch? I'm turning 50 this year, and we are planning a really epic trip to Italy. And every once in a while I have this little like, whose permission do I need? Like, I still feel like there's somebody that I need to be checking with, right? It's fascinating. And this is, so deeply rooted in my work. So it's so interesting to me. My work, actually, I'll say two things. One is, you recognize that I call it the imposter complex. Clance and Iams called it imposter phenomenon. I think Amy Cuddy calls it imposter experience.
Yeah.
But when Sheryl Sandberg named it as imposter syndrome, that's where that really took off. My SEO people get deeply annoyed with me that I don't use imposter syndrome, because that's what people are searching for because of the popularity of that book. And it's technically not correct, because it's not a medical diagnosis. It's an experience. And I just want to be mindful of not co-opting medical terms. So that's why I call it a complex. I'm starting to see people using that more. That feels great. And like you said, I love the double entendre, the fact that it is pretty complex. So, absolutely. The other, I won't say the hallmarks of it, but it really is rooted. So let me just say this a little bit differently. We actually understand that there's a bioevolutionary context to this experience because it's really part of our fundamental need to belong, which I think is really where this dovetails beautifully with your work. We really want to belong. So the imposter complex is perpetually showing us places that we don't belong, to be on high alert for where we belong and where we don't belong, which is why it has us fearing success as much as it has us fearing failure. And so we can dive in there, but I feel like this is also, we don't want to feel like we don't belong. So we go to 6 really specific behaviors to make sure we feel like we belong. And that's people pleasing. Hi. Where we allow our boundaries to be leaky. So leaky boundaries, procrastination, diminishment, comparison, and ding, 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 perfectionism. So again, much more to say on each of these, like all of this. But perfectionism is also, the calling card of patriarchy. Is also one of the most fundamental characteristics of white supremacy culture characteristics. So again, the layers upon the layers upon the layers upon the layers are undeniable. But that's the way that we will try to insulate ourselves from being cast out, not belonging, all of that. Okay, I digress.
And I love that recognition of what it is trying to do to benefit us. It's what we were sort of saying in the intro. That there are, we have all of these parts. We are complex creatures, and that, for me, certainly in the work that I do, it's this sense that there are no bad parts. There's just, for whatever reason, this part that is desperately trying to belong. And I love that that's where the link is. That really makes sense to me. That it's this part that is desperately trying to belong and is so terrified that we might do something that means that we don't belong. That's what fires up the fears around imposter. Because I suppose, I can almost hear the dialogue inside me going, well, the thing is, if you get too cocky, people aren't going to like you. If you start taking credit for something, people are going to say you're really big-headed. And it goes on. Yeah. Right? So it's
Joe
all
Casey,
about belonging.
Yeah, Joe Casey named feminine conditioning for me many years ago. And I feel like, so we can even see where if these are the ways that we go to hide out, well, the diminishment that you just spoke to, that's conditioning, right?
Yeah.
What do we know about good girls? They don't brag. They don't take up too much space, right? So what do we know about perfectionism in good girls? So like so much of that is feminine conditioning. And I say that, just right across the board, our understanding of what it means to be a good girl, regardless of, gender, we have this shared understanding. So, yeah, so those are the reasons we go to those behaviors. The one thing I really think that this is endlessly fascinating to me. So, I look at this as, sort of, I'm glad we're on video because I'm doing some visuals now with my hands. The imposter complex is sitting in the middle, and each of these behavioral traits is ringing it. We go to the perfectionism to avoid feeling like the imposter. Okay. So I'm going to make sure that my work is above reproach, that I do this just perfectly, and then maybe I will belong. That's not the perfect narrative, but that's a pretty familiar narrative. And so, but when we go to that behavior, that actually exacerbates our sense of imposterhood. So it's like this double bind. So I don't want to feel like the imposter, so I go over here. But in so being over here, I feel more like the imposter because I'm working so hard. I'm so diligent. I'm doing things as well as I possibly can. And then I look up and I think, well, gosh, nobody else has to work this hard. Oh, there's something wrong with me. Clearly, I'm the imposter. Right? If I don't want to feel, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's this ricochet
Mm.
of, you know, the well, or the self-fulfilling prophecy, or, you know, vicious circle, whatever the language is,
Mm-hmm.
you know, but it is like it's that each thing then
Yeah,
feeds itself,
right.
and
That's
it
right.
becomes deeper and deeper ingrained.
Yes. So in each one of them has a similar story. Also, just very quickly tell you about people pleasing and then diminishment, and then we can because I think those are the ones that I suspect that most folks that are paying attention here, those are the places that they might get a little hung up. And I have some good news too, of course. So if we are people pleasers, again, hi, I want to make sure that I belong. I want to make sure that I fit in. So I am going to use my charm and my likability to make sure that I belong. Okay. But so I don't want to feel like this. I go over here to people pleasing. But when I'm over here and I get the invitations and I'm asked to speak on that stage, or I'm asked to do this, I chalk it up to the fact that they like me, not to the fact that I'm deeply skilled and brilliant and talented at what I do.
Can we just take a little moment,
Yeah.
Tanya, while I giggle internally and out loud and go, oh my God,
Mm-hmm.
do I recognize that
Ding, ding,
thought?
ding.
That is hilarious. That
Ding,
is
ding, ding.
absolutely hilarious. You have named something that I have even heard myself say out loud.
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for that.
Absolutely. 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 So we are going to chalk that up. And so in this behavior over here, we're like, so now we're in the group, we're feeling like completely like an imposter. And then the diminishment, the who am I to, this actually shows up when, again, we don't want to feel like the imposter. We want to make sure that we are belonging, but we don't want to shine too brightly. We don't want to commit, as Gay Hendricks says, the sin about shining. We know what happens to people who shine too brightly, right? Tall poppy syndrome, they get clipped. So what do? We diminish. We shroud our sense of pride and our sense of celebration that we did something really amazing. Over time, this sense of diminishment, we start to believe it. We start to believe our less confident bios. We start to believe the words that we say when we say it's no big deal. We start to believe that it's actually no big deal, right? So that's the consequence of going to this behavior to avoid feeling like the imposter. So it is exactly that. It is this ricocheting. But and so we could do this for each and every one of the six. So we've done 3. Here's the part that I always think about, what's his name? Russell Crowe in A Beautiful Mind. We just sort of like sees, this is how I see it. I have been searching high and low for somebody who can help me really put this into some kind of 3D modeling, because this is how I see it. But what is most fascinating to me, and this is where I think we talk about the self-development space, is that each of these behavioral traits do not happen in isolation. Not only do they ricochet back and forth, toggling between imposter complex and then this behavior, but they also bounce off of each other. So we get a little bit of a handle, say, on our procrastination, right? We read Mel Robbins' book, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, action, right? We get into action. So we deal with that. Or we read something that's very inspiring. So we decide we're gonna kick our diminishment habit. But the moment we have a bit of a handle on it, boop, comparison's going to pop up. And then from there, perfectionism's going to pop up, or. So even though usually it is a specific behavior that brings people to my work, what we go into is the whole structure of it. Because, and I think that this is where we've been getting it wrong in the self-development space, where we are looking at each of these traits or ways of being in isolation and not looking at the totality of the structure, and also making ourselves deeply wrong for it. And this is where this is where things start to get real good.
Yeah, that holistic perspective, I think, is so vital because everything communicates. So for me, each one of those traits shows up as a part, and our parts communicate with each other, and they also protect each other, and they collude with each other, and
That's
they,
right.
and they also like are irritated by each other. So it's, in internal family systems where you have that endless kind of inner dialogue going on, each of these parts, this, creates this complex whole. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, I mean, it's so gorgeous to listen to you and to sort of hear how we're not only sort of toggling, like you say, between perfectionism and the imposter, but how we spin from one to another, and all in a way of trying to protect ourselves,
That's
trying
right.
to help ourselves. But it's through this. So my interpretation is it's through this kind of this is all learnt behavior from
Mhm.
somewhere down the line, maybe even ancestral, but it's learnt. And so where does that take us next? How do we, once we have this awareness, because I think that's always step one, we have
Mhm.
start to build this awareness of what's going on for ourselves. What comes next, Tanya? What do we do to support ourselves?
Well, once again, and I give thanks to Desiree Adaway, who is my social justice coach, for naming the framework that I always think about, which is Barbara J. Love's liberatory consciousness. So, as you said, building awareness in liberatory consciousness, then the next step is analysis, and then action, and then accountability. And she's talking about this from an anti-racist perspective, and I think about it, of course, through that rubric in my own anti-racism explorations and work. But I think of it also as it relates to this. So if you've got awareness, then we need to do some analysis, and then we can take action. Because I think that this is again a place that we miss this analysis part. We miss this. We go straight into action. We go buy the book, right? We buy the book on procrastination. We buy the book on perfectionism. We say, oh, okay, I'm going to stop now. I recognize it's a problem. Now I'm going to stop. Nope. We got to get into and under what's actually going on. So I think that there's some great news in the analysis here, particularly if you have identified which of the behavioral traits you begin with, the one that you would say, oh, this is my problem. Um, uh, sorry, again, seeing two doors and just trying to check which door I want to go through. I think that's the one I'll go through. I feel like my kid right now, if she were watching, she'd be like, "Oh, mom, you just Benedict, you just Sherlock Holmes mind palace that." That's very funny. I've never actually seen that before. Yes. So I digress. I'm going to blame my COVID brain for that little glip there. Um, I do think that, and I say this sort of out of both sides of my mouth, um, it is we are part of a self-development industry that is actually a $40 billion and counting industry, devoted to making people feel like there's something fundamentally wrong with them.
Oh my God. I saw you posted something about this on Instagram, I think, last week. And I resonated so deeply with what you said because if inherent in the message is that in some way you need to be fixed or in some way you need to change, then for me, it's the antithesis of well-being.
Right.
We have to approach our whole self and the people that we are with no judgment,
Right.
because it's judgment that drives negativity. It's judgment that drives the negative self-talk, the way that we react to others rather than respond mindfully.
Well, it
Yeah.
keeps us out of action. And I think for me, that's the part that there are too many good ideas. There's too much change that is needed right here, right now, for us to be in our heads trying to fix a part of ourselves that is not actually fundamentally broken. It is actually just very fundamentally telling us, this is what you had, like, this is what you've been given. This is what you have learned. What are we going to do with it? So when we recognize that, we have that perfectionism is a place that we go to avoid feeling like the imposter, I say, wonderful. This means you have an extraordinary value of excellence. Your comparison, that you're supposed to stop comparing yourself to other people. Bad. Really, this just speaks deeply into how much you value and cherish connection. Your procrastination has everything to do with the fact that you are very deeply discerning. Your leaky boundaries mean that you have extraordinary vats of generosity that are available to you. Your diminishment might have everything to do with a deeply ingrained value of humility. And your people pleasing might have everything to do with the value of inclusivity. And also, let's be real clear, safety. For many folks who have been marginalized or oppressed, making sure that they belong is not an issue of confidence. It is an issue of safety. So I think we need to be real clear about that. And then when you think about those values, humility and discernment and excellence and connection, that's what I want in my leaders. That's what I want for myself. So instead of dialing down, what do we amp it up, right? What do we lead with that? Okay, I'm a perfectionist. I value excellence. So let me lean fully into that. Let me recognize the places that it will keep me out of action, doubting my capacity and alone and isolated, get some support with that, but really lead with that, because that's the kind of leader I am. I value excellence.
So this is about reframing. Ooh. This is about seeing the truth of what is, and then casting a very compassionate light upon it, and not standing in a place of judgment, not standing in that sort of transactional analysis, critical parent, just everything's wrong with me. Yeah. Just really seeing, okay, so what's the truth of my experience, and then framing it in such a way that it becomes a superpower, even. Yes. Gorgeous, because so often I think, and in fact, actually, one of the things that I was reflecting on before I contacted you was that there is so much stuff that I come across around imposter complex, which is about how to cut through the feelings of inadequacy. And again, it's that very kind of hard-edged language, rather than sort of softening into it and seeing, well, what's it showing me? What's it telling me? And there's something that I just wanted to touch on. I'm mindful that we don't have sort of too long to talk, and I'm kind of thinking I'd like to get you back on the show at some point, Tanya, and continue talking. But there is something here that I often wonder whether we have these feelings because on a soul level there is something that is trying to speak to us. There is something that's telling us something important about our purpose or our dharma or our sense of self. And maybe that kind of ties into what you were just saying, actually, this thing about, well, I value humility. And so therefore, what does that tell me about the way that I show up best in the world, rather than hiding from the world? But how do I actually show up best? And I love what you said as well about, the traits that we're actually looking for in our leaders is not more shouting and more telling. It's listening and communicating and self-awareness. But can you just reflect back to me on that idea of purpose and the kind of soul message that might be coming through?
I know that when I name for somebody that their people pleasing has everything to do with their value of inclusivity, that their whole being feels seen and recognized. And so when that is true, I know that we are in the land of purpose. I know that we are in the land of purpose. You know, you see it, right? You see, you feel this sort of expansive, and then the immediate, like, what do we do about that? And that, like, that immediate, what do we do about that? Oh, also tells me purpose. Also tells me, okay, got it. Now what do I do? This is a beautiful life. It's a short life. Give me my steps. Like, what's next? So that's where I have folks work with an identity that is assigned to that beautiful value that they want to uphold, and that gives them something to step into, because the moment this recognition happens, whew, it's a lot, right? You can't unsee it. You can't unsee, oh yeah, that's right, that's probably where I got that from, and then it was reinforced here and then here. Oh my gosh. And then you have this want for other people to have this clarity too. That also feels like purpose. So I talk about iconic identities.
Oh, we're having a bit of a, I'm just going to pause. There we go. A bit of a technical hitch there on the recording, but
Okay.
yeah, so
You've got a ways to sort of smooth it over. You're all
yeah,
good.
we can smooth it over. For the people watching on YouTube, they'll just, this is live. This is real life.
Are we live right now? We literally are live.
No, we're not literally live.
Oh, okay. How fun is that? So I like to give people a bit, because again, it almost creates a sense of agoraphobia, like, oh my goodness, everything becomes possible all of a sudden. So I like giving folks an invitation to step into a very specific identity so that they can start working with it right away. And it's not perfect, and it's not going to fit perfectly. And of course, why would it? Because I'm literally taking something that is off the rack and saying, here, try this on. So it's not going to fit perfectly, but it's enough to give people a little, oh, this feels good. I like this. And I'm not really crazy about that. So what I say iconic identities, because the language is so big. It's such a calling forth, which is, I'm very interested in that. And also, you can't spell iconic without IC twice. Meaning, the moment you decide to step into your CEO identity, the imposter complex is going to show up and say, well, we can't do that. Like, what? And now we have something to work with, because really I'm interested in giving people the tools to be able to deal with the imposter complex every time it shows up. And then as we operate from that identity, it's going to show up as you've been very comfortable with it for a period of time as well. That's how it works. It's not a one and done. Yeah. This is about having a faster recovery when it shows up, like I said. So for the perfectionist, I invite people to step into the identity of CEO. And this helps folks to recognize that if I were CEO of my life, of my business, of my household, whatever it is, a CEO knows that high standards matter, and so does getting the thing done. Things have to happen. And we have to make sure that we've got the right people around us supporting the same vision. So that would be the CEO's work, is to make sure that they have the right people surrounding them. And it's interesting when you mentioned the diminishment, recognizing that you have diminishment means that, okay, what do I do with that? Well, you step into a identity of that, a visionary. You have brilliant ideas and they need to get out. And you recognize that you tend to diminish, meaning that you are not always trusting yourself to be the person to get those ideas out. Bring in some people to help make sure that you do that. Because the ideas that are coming forth are bigger than you. We cannot have you standing in the way. As a people pleaser, the moment I realized that my ability to gather people with grace and ease means I'm a host. So much of what I do has everything to do with gathering people, creating beautiful circles of contained presence. But my job is to remember that my place is in the party, not in the kitchen, creating all the magic. People are there to be with me, not just the experience. That's what I need to remember as the host. For the person who struggles with comparison, that tells me that you've got this beautiful value of connection and that you're a maven. You are the person who connects ideas and people and sees. But one of the challenges that the maven faces is that they over-identify with what's going on outside and not so much their inner landscape. For somebody who struggles with boundaries, this points us to their value of generosity, which points me to the fact that they're a healer. And their job is to make sure that they are part of that beautiful circle of care that they create for everyone else, which means they will be upholding their boundaries. The sage is the person who maybe berates themselves for being a procrastinator, but really their value of discernment means that they are mindful. They take their time because what they're working on really matters. So they're very deeply discerning about it. So each of these identities is typically something outside of what we would normally see in ourselves and is a calling forth and gives us something to work with as we look to uncouple ourselves from the ongoing experience of the imposter complex.
There's also something really powerful here about this celebration of self as well.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
That's it.
ma'am. Yeah. And so, gosh, there's so much richness here. And as soon as the book is out, then you have to tell me, and I will make
Yes.
sure I share it with people, because I think there's so much to kind of sit inside and to explore, about like, well, how does this feel for me? And I'm sure that people have, more than one, but they might have a dominant one, or they might have a couple that are really dominant and that show up at different times, etc. So that, I think, warrants kind of re-listening actually to what you've just been sharing. But I'm curious about what's been your own sort of core learning, like as you've been uncovering this, uncovering all of this for yourself. What's been your own kind of core learning? How has it really shown up for you personally?
Well, I think a lot about integrity because, if you experience the imposter complex, almost by definition, it means that you have beautiful values of excellence, integrity, and proficiency. And so I think a lot about integrity in particular, because, proficiency can sort of has a sniff of perfectionism, but it's still, this deep, I want to do really well in all that I do. That's how I'm wired. And I love that about myself, frankly. But this integrity piece is no joke, right? Because it means that I have to, if I'm not experiencing the imposter complex in some way, shape, or form, then I'm not doing it right. It tells me that I'm not swinging out far enough. I'm not challenging myself to the next and the next and the next. And so this like kind of like, you get it, you see, but it means that it's like, oh God, why did I pick this? Or why did this come pick me? Right? I don't want to have to feel this all the time, to make sure that my tools, that everything that I have learned and everything that I teach and everything that I guide people through actually works, right? Why can't I just talk about joy and experience that all the time to make sure I'm in integrity? Nope. So, I mean, honestly, it's this, when I say a faster recovery, that is what I mean. I am now at a place where I think, great, okay, this is up for me. This must be important. Great. What am I going to do with it? But like I said, when we were talking about like getting tripped up over my trip to Italy, like who's going to tell me? Like there's still somebody who's going to tell me I can't. It runs really deep. So as much as this is one of the things that I think people who work with me in my groups love the most about working with me, because I'm very transparent about my process, very transparent about the fact that I'm continuously calibrating I'm continuously paying attention to the very things that I expect my students to be working with. Oof, I'm not feeling very powerful. What are the tools that I need to come back to? I'm not holding myself in my work with reverence. What are the tools that I need to come back to? So it's just this, I always talk about this being a kind of an upward spiral. It very much is the new level, the new devils, new levels, new devils, like I said that. And it's, it doesn't ever really fully go away. That's what
And
I can keep
that's,
learning.
yeah, I mean, that reminds me of the Richard Buck quote that we teach what we most need to learn,
Mm.
of course. And I know, you know, I work in self compassion because, you know, uh, spoiler alert, I spend an awful lot of time beating myself up.
That's right. Right.
And so it's all about the okay, so how do we come into this place of compassion? What are the tools? What's
And
the
you're
stuff I need to put in place?
and you're modeling possibility too, though, right? So
Mm,
if I've tracked well, there's some people pleasing, yes, and there's some diminishment. So
mm,
thank heavens that you have decided to find a way to work gracefully with what you have been given, and are finding a way to speak about it in such a way that others can relate, can
yeah,
hear it, and do something with it. That's what I think we've all been called to do.
yeah.
Be that model of possibility for somebody else.
That's I mean, that feels like a beautiful place to close today, actually, Tanya, to be that model of possibility for
Mhm,
someone else. And I think that's something that we can all be,
mhm.
actually. And that really speaks, as my reflection here is that speaks to the heart of what the sort of imposter complex, can actually give to us is the recognition of our humanity and the recognition of other people's humanity. So to be able to support others in the way that we support ourselves. Really beautiful. Honestly, if you were here in person as opposed to, however many thousand miles away across the water, I would be giving you the most enormous hug right now.
Oh,
I
and I
have
would receive it gratefully, gratefully.
thoroughly enjoyed our conversation.
As did
And
I.
yeah, I'll share how people can connect with you and hear more about the beautiful work that you do. Wonderful.
Thank you so much for the honor of being here. It was absolutely delicious and delightful. Thank you.
What a roller coaster of a ride that was. Gosh, her energy, her knowledge, her compassion, her enthusiasm for this work. I found it really inspiring talking with Tanya, and I hope you did too. And I just want to say as well, if anything that we've talked about today has sparked a thought for you, then take a look at Tanya's work, and always share your thoughts with me. I love to hear, and if you want to message Tanya through me, then you're always very welcome to do that, and I'll make sure I pass it on. So, my darlings, as ever, may you be safe, may you be well, may you be happy, may you live with ease. And I send you a hug and a wave.